All right. Hey, I'm Dawn Marie Solis with INIS 2022 Neurodiversity Conference, and I am so excited to be bringing to you the brilliant ideas of LaToya Pryce. She is a financial wellness advocate in the financial services industry, and she is working currently as a culture and inclusion officer. She's got her MBA, she's pursuing her PhD, and she is the mom of a spectacular neurodivergent child, and I'm over the moon. We are going to be talking diversity and inclusion, momhood, all kinds of stuff, so that we can think more about these ideas with LaToya included. So LaToya, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Being part of this.
Yeah.
Maybe professional stuff first.
Okay.
You refer to yourself as a financial wellness advocate.
Yes.
Let's start there. What does that mean for you?
Financial wellness advocate is just me advocating for others to live financially healthy lives. One of the things that I see is kind of that socioeconomic barriers to financial health. What's preventing people from getting a house or getting a car or just living just a little bit better than check to check, a little bit more? Budgeting issues. So those are the things that I've seen, and I wanted to advocate for them. A lot of times they feel like they do not have a voice, right? There is this stereotype that you need to be super rich or super connected to have a financially healthy life. And that's not true at all, right? It starts with the basics. It starts with financial literacy. It just starts with someone being willing to say, hey, let me share this knowledge with you and put you on, a better financial journey.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's something that is shockingly missing. Financial education is something I just don't even understand why it's so missing from our K-12 education system in the United States, and even from other sources of education. It's just not something that we seem to view societally as for everyone, right? Like you said, well, financial wellness is whether or not I can pay my bills. Right? I have a roof over my head. But it's so far beyond that. And the impact of the lack of financial knowledge, the anxiety around money, the fact that money is one of the primary causes for the ends of relationships, right? There's so much about our financial well-being that impacts our life, and we don't get taught about it.
No, financial literacy has always been seen as a privilege for some.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize the amounts of financial literacy education I got at home was not the norm, right? I happened to have a mom that was a banker, a father who went to school for accounting. So those were just natural things that we talked about money in my home. So having a bank account at a very young age, understanding that when you get your allowance, how to allocate that money was instilled from childhood, right? Growing up, starting to work in the financial service industry and coming across individuals who've never had a bank account in their life, right? Who rely on check cashing stores because that was what was available to them, or that was the knowledge that they had about financial institutions. So there was such this huge gap, and I did not value that privilege that I had until seeing more and more individuals lacking that financial literacy.
Yeah. In the news recently, we're hearing more and more about how different certain communities have it, right? So you can live in a fairly densely populated area and not have a grocery store. Right. You can live in a fairly densely populated area and not have a library, a bank, a credit union, they're a gas station. Hey, you can live with a lot of other people very, very close to you where you would assume certain things would be available, right?
Right.
What would business want more than a densely packed area to plant itself in? But the way our culture views certain spaces, certain areas, certain skin colors, certain whatever, there's a prejudgment about whether or not that community is worth the effort. And you and I could go, really off into that world because, the other part of you is diversity and inclusion. Your current work is in that space. And, my ADHD, all of my thought monkeys are very, very happy with the 90 different things we could talk about. But I do want to kind of circle back and go, okay, so regardless of community struggle or lack of access in physical form, there's a whole additional piece for the purposes of our conversation, the neurodivergent community. There's an additional piece that might remove them from financial well-being,
Right.
Whether it's a difficulty processing numbers, dyscalculia. I am dyscalculic, right? Whether it's executive function challenges, setting up your bill pay, getting yourself to follow a timeline, right? Some of those things. There are a number of things that the neurodivergent community has as part of their package that makes them them, that also might make it very hard to be financially well.
Most definitely. I even think of those who are not neurodiverse having challenges with that financial information. If you've ever sat at a mortgage closing, I'm pretty sure 90% of the people do not read what they're signing, do not know what they're signing, just know at the end of this 40 pages, I get a mortgage, right?
Right.
If they do have questions, how easier is the conversation, or how easier could the conversation be with someone who is not neurodiverse versus someone who is, right? When we do get into situations where we are getting into loans and things of that nature, are we making sure that whether you are neurodiverse or not, do you understand what it is that you're doing, right? I think about going into a branch, any type of, any financial institution, and just the amount of stimuli that's there, right? The level of intimidation. You could be the friendliest person on earth, but if I just really don't understand what it is I need or how to execute it, that is a very intimidating situation. And then, of course, there's the, hey, let me show you this and show you that, right? Someone who can only focus on a handful of things at the same time, you're now, wow, just overwhelming them. And they might just be at the point where it's like, just give me everything so I can leave. Right. So I think there needs to be a lot more conversations in the financial industry on how do we meet our customers where they're most comfortable at, right? How do we design literature, marketing pieces, documents that will be something that everyone can, read and understand? Or what's the time we take to do that? Or do we notice someone who comes in that may express to you, hey, I am neurodiverse? What's your response? Right? I always laughed and I shared this story that one of the things I always do is when I go to new places with my daughter is I tell individuals that she's neurodiverse, she's on the autism spectrum, and a lot of people start talking louder to her, right? And, and I understand what they're trying to do, but then it's like, what is your understanding of neurodiversity? Yes, we've come a long way. In the last decade, we've made some tremendous movement, but there's still that stigma, there's still that stereotype. So how do we start breaking those barriers to make things equal for equality access?
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It can feel like too much, right? So if I have to go into a financial institution, my doctor's office, my children's school, right? Any place I have to go into, and I have to be responsible for their education, that's really hard. And that's not to say that like everybody has to be an expert in everything. It's too much to ask of all of us, right? But some basic level of understanding, some at least how to ask a question. I recently talked to a group of medical students. They're just about to start their rotation being out in doctors' offices and hospitals and stuff like that. And after, hearing what I was telling them about neurodiversity and impediments to healthcare for this population, one of the students said, "What do we do?" I mean, he was really like shaken at some of the stats and stuff like that I was given, and my own personal story, and just really, really affected and sincere, right? What do we do? And I said, I can't give you what do we do, right?
Right.
But I can tell you, when you greet a patient, you can say, "Hey, how can I make you most comfortable? How can I hear you better?" Right? You can ask what the person needs. And if somebody is not able to tell you, then you ask permission to ask more questions. They may not be able to receive more questions, right? That might make it worse. But you can start with a few questions and see where you go. That's going to tell you what you can do. That little bit of information pumped out to all of customer service. You actually can ask anybody. You don't have to know they're neurodivergent. You don't have to know they have a special need. You don't have to know anything, because you're going to start by asking.
Right. I think we live in a society where everyone knows best for you. And that seems to be an issue. We need to learn and get into the mindset of honoring people's choices and people's preferences. I think that's what's the biggest lack, right? If someone comes in and they do express to you that they are part of the neurodiverse community, we make these assumptions, and I'm going to do what's best for you. I'm going to give you what I think you need, versus asking those questions and honoring those preferences. I even tie it back to myself going out with my daughter to restaurants and ordering food, dessert, the boxes, and the bill all at the same time, because that's what I needed in order for me to enjoy a night out with my child, right? There were some places that were like, well, we don't do this. Doesn't mean it can't be done, right? I'm making a request, you can fulfill it. So I think, they'll say, well, what I think is best, let's just wait a while and then no, what I'm asking for is this. Great, I like what you're saying, but unfortunately, it does not meet my needs. So I think we have to just develop that mindset, is honoring individuals. Allow me to be myself. I always say, me being me should never stop you from being you, right? Adopting that mindset in any industry, I think, will help a lot of people, whether they be neurodiverse or they come from a marginalized community or they just simply don't look like us, right? That would be the key.
I'm totally with you on that. A couple of different things that you said. Your restaurant experience, people speaking more loudly to your daughter when they when they learn that she's neurodivergent. All of the stuff that we're talking about now falls in that diversity and inclusion space. And before I started recording you and I started having such a fun conversation about that, so I'm like, wait, quit, let me hit the record button. I think diversity and inclusion so far traditionally has been focused appropriately on underserved individuals, people who have societal and institutional barriers to inclusion in all sorts of places. It's absolutely appropriate. So when I'm going to say my next thing, it is not to criticize anything that's being done, right? It's only been very, very recently, though, that a very few diversity and inclusion spaces in the business world, in the education world, et cetera, have begun thinking about, it's not just about outwardly obvious different types of people, the need for a wheelchair, the need to see someone as human, regardless of what their package looks like, right? Those are perfect and exactly what diversity and inclusion should be doing. But there are also neurotypes. Not everybody thinks the same. Not everybody works successfully in a beige cube, right? Not everybody does well in artificial light.
Right.
And we can say, suck it up, buttercup, deal with it. This is what your
Mhm.
office space looks like. You want a job, we don't owe you anything.
Right.
Okay. But how much are we missing when we do that? Are we missing our people's best? Are we missing?
1,000%.
Yeah. Are we
1,000%.
missing just from the get-go, right? I interview well for about 2/3 of an interview.
Mhm.
If I want a job, right? And then I'm not sure I said everything autism shows up. And my extreme sincerity autism shows up. Right?
Right.
And I watch it happen. I watch the eyes go, oh, that's a crazy person. Right.
Mhm.
And
Right.
then my autism kicks into extra like panic gear because of my past experiences, and it all turns the volume up, right? Okay, extra sincere, extra words, extra, right? It all, so I undo the good I did in the beginning. If
Right.
people don't even know that that's a neurotype, they're going to misunderstand what's going on.
Mhm. You said so many different things in
I
that.
did. ADHD.
I'm all over it. So when we talk about diversity, we do pay more attention to physical characteristics, but there's a ton of internal, right? The internal characteristics, that diversity of thought is very important. When I think about diversity of thought, I think of psychological safety. I think now we're really moving towards psychological safety and understanding the impact of DEI on mental health, right? When we're sitting down now and we're having interviews and we're looking for diverse candidates, we're no longer looking to fill positions, we're looking for people. So if you're going into an interview, having an interview, understanding that I'm looking for a person, you're going to know everyone is not the same, right? My responses to answers are not going to be textbook. I'm not going to Google the night before top 5 answers to questions asked at interviews, right? Pieces of me are going to come out. My thought is this: if I do not feel psychologically safe in an interview, then I will not feel psychologically safe working for your organization. And I won't be able to be my authentic self. Therefore, I don't belong. Right. So I think we have to be very mindful and cognizant of when we are interviewing. We're not interviewing for positions, we're interviewing people. Same thing when we're having conversations with our customers. These are people. Right? We have to start getting better at managing relationships with people. I think we do well with things, right? We have our cell phone. We buy cell phone protectors. We're on our that's a thing, and we're good at managing that. But we have to manage better at people. And I always say this: as mankind, humankind, we are so far along in technology, but we're kind of stunted in the humanity aspect, right? So now we're switching focus on the human part of it. How do we connect with humans again? Because we allow technology to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, but it can't do everything.
Yeah, I think that emotional intelligence piece that we just don't get educated on. We don't get taught how to have relationships. We don't get taught even how to look at our own needs and why they're there and what our emotions mean. We don't get taught any of that stuff. We get taught behavior rules,
Mhm.
right? Share, be nice, stuff like that. But those rules actually don't always work.
Right.
Um, there's
And they
situations
don't
where it's
always
actually not
honor individuality either, right?
right.
When we
Right.
immediately say share, that's the nice thing to do. But what if this is something that I wanted for myself? What if this is my moment, my experience, my toy? And just for this one time, I wanted it to be mine, but you're telling me to fit into cultural norms that I need to share, right? Without asking me, why don't you want to share? Because maybe my reason to not share might be more compelling than keeping up with the status quo.
Yeah. Um, we just went through, 2 years and we're still kind of in it of don't share with anybody rules.
Right.
Right? Dear God, don't share with anybody
Right.
anything. Don't touch anybody's stuff. Don't, right? So we went through this moment where to be kind,
Hmm.
we didn't share. and you didn't ask to be shared with. That was the kind thing. So I think we have this really unique moment in terms of processing how we think about diversity and inclusion. One of the things that gets asked of me all the time is, why do your needs get to have special treatment, right? Why do I have to know all of the ways that other people want me to behave? It's too much. It's it's too burdensome. It's, can't people just assume I'm trying to be a decent human and let me off the hook? And I think there is a little bit of that, right? Like, we can't expect everybody to have all of the knowledge all of the time. And
No,
some
but you
people
can expect the kindness though. So
right.
that kindness, to me, I always say there's a difference between being nice and being kind, right? You can fake being nice because we were always told to what? Play nice. No one told you to play kind. So it's that digging and saying, let me put this person's needs in front of my own, or let me be accommodating, let me be flexible. That's the part of kind that we need when someone is making a special request.
Yeah, to make space for others, right? And how we do that, I do think we're learning more, at least in the diversity and inclusion space, the emotional intelligence space. I think we're learning more how to find solutions where nobody's needs supersedes the other.
Right.
That one of the things that I teach is nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's theory of how to get your needs met. And he talks about the idea that if you truly know what you need and you know how to articulate it and you know how to accept no for an answer,
right,
you will eventually find a way to get your needs met. If you're not sure what they are, you might blame for your lack. You might accuse for your lack. You might shun for your lack, right? Or you may ask the wrong people.
Right.
Right? I use plumber versus electrician often in this thing, where if I need an electrician, the plumber may know some stuff about electricity, but his forte or her forte is plumbing, right? So yeah, they may know some stuff and they may be willing to help, but they might not be exactly the right person. And their helpfulness to me might be more effective in, you know what, I know some stuff, but I think you're going to be better served if you actually get an electrician.
Right.
Right? So sometimes our kindness is, that's probably not for me. No, thank you. I'm not going to help in that situation. Right? So how we view kindness really needs to be more about, I want to make sure your needs get met. If I'm not the right person for you, maybe I can help you find the right person, or maybe I just need to step out of the way. And I think that's a context where we can talk about, it's not that I'm asking for special for me. It's that I'm asking for a different concept of how we deal with each other in society. And that's what you're saying, right? Let's look at this. Like, even when we were starting with the financial wellness stuff, you were talking about, doesn't matter if you're neurodiverse or quote unquote neurotypical, right? You're going to have your way of processing this information, your way of relating to it, and your way of doing things. And I am going to help you be financially successful and well if I adopt your way and help you succeed with that, right? So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, to me, I'm a human first person, right? Let's get to know the human as a fellow, as an equal. Because the difference first perspective, I think, often goes wrong, right? When diversity and inclusion is presented as an avenue for anti-racism, I think it goes sideways, right? It can have things that are absolutely in the anti-racism category, right? But if that's the point, we're going to do things from a skewed perspective, right?
It's a limiting perspective.
It's a limiting perspective.
It's a limiting perspective. And I think that's the hindrance to a lot of DEI work, is that limiting perspective, saying that it can only be this. This is what it is. That's not the case, right? I think it also ties back into some of the hindrances that people have with having their needs being met, because inclusion and accommodation often gets mixed up with personal preferences and favoritism. And that's not the case. So when you were talking about someone saying, well, why are your needs more special than my needs? Or why should we accommodate you? Well, we're not on the same playing ground. It's not equal to begin with, right? I think we need to learn the difference between equality and equity. Just because you have a job and I have a job at the same place, yes, okay, that's equal, but the tools and the resources and the access, they're unbalanced. So my request is to put me on the same page, to be like you, right? But we focus so much on the differences and focus on what we don't have, that we fail to realize that if this person has this, right, we would probably be on equal footing. So that's something that I've encountered a lot.
I love that. I think, especially in business and education, where the basis can be perceived as competitive,
Mhm.
the idea of starting at the same starting line, right? If you're going to run track, you're going to run the circle track, right? Only short distances start shoulder to shoulder
Mhm.
at the starting gun, right?
Right.
If you're going to run more than half the track, you have to start one here, next line over, next line over, next line over, right? Because where you are side to side on the track, the distance is different, right?
Right.
So somebody on the inside piece of the track actually has less to run one lap around than the person on the outside of the track,
Mhm.
right? So in order to start that race with everybody at the same starting line, you actually have to scatter them depending
Right.
on what lane they're in. And that's what I think you're talking about. Bringing people to the same plane, to the same playing field is, the easy thing is building access, right? If you
Mhm.
build a ramp, everybody can get in. If you stick with the stairs, only some people can get in. If you're
Right.
trying to provide access and you have to choose, please build a ramp. Everybody can use the ramp, right? That's the level playing field.
Yeah.
What can we do so that everybody has access? What can we do so that no matter how you come, there's no roadblock to success? And because considering psychological safety, like you were talking about before,
Mhm.
considering different learning styles, considering different communication styles, considering differences is actually so tremendously new in our culture. We're not used to it yet. It feels like you're making me run more of the track, right?
Right.
I was here and I
First.
got it. I ran my
Yeah.
piece of the track. Now you're making me run longer. No, I'm not. No, I'm
Mhm.
not. I'm not taking anything away from you when I bring me to an accommodated space so that you and I can work successfully together.
And
Right?
that's that mismatch in the definition of equality and equity. We like to make things equal, right? So having stairs to get in the building, everybody has equal access to the building, but they don't, right? So that's that equity that comes in that says, let's build the ramp. Let's have an alternate route into the building. That way, most people, right, have access. So that's something I think, even when advocating for my child in school, is explaining that, right? Yes, fair. Everybody gets 2 pieces of toast and an apple juice, but my child doesn't eat toast, doesn't like the texture. So can she have 2 apples? And maybe you trade it with the child that wants extra toast. Like thinking like that, I always get hit with, well, that's not the way we do things. That's not the way you did things, right? But I'm presenting you with a new challenge and a new solution, right? That does not take that much to accommodate, or at least we should have a discussion. I think we're so quick, even in business, to always shut things down because we're not used to it, right? The greatest hindrance to progress is the fact that people fear change. So how do we
Absolutely.
have that? So the conversation is less about the accommodation, less about inclusion, and more about change. How do we embrace change? Change as an organization, change as a society. That's where we're having that little stomachache issue with, because we have to change the way we normally do things.
I think picking up on what you said about your child is probably a good place to pivot to some more personal stuff
Mhm.
for you. You are a mom of a child on the spectrum. There's so much about that that is necessary, is required of you,
Mhm.
and so much that blesses you at the same time, right? Um, the working title for the book I'm working on right now is "I Love My Children, I Hate Being a Parent."
Yeah, it's
Um,
everybody's book.
because I find the parenting requirements difficult to extremely difficult to traumatic.
Mhm.
Needing to advocate for my neurodiverse children, they're all adults now. Needing to advocate for them, especially before I understood their neurodiversity. Unfortunately, the four of us got, I have three children. Unfortunately, the four of us got through their growing up without understanding any of our neurodiversity. I didn't know
Mm.
I was autistic and ADHD and the whole list of things that I am until I was 50. The only thing I knew was dyslexia.
Right,
And the only thing I was ever taught about my dyslexia was to read with my finger.
right.
So I didn't understand, one, what was motivating some of my parenting choices.
Mhm.
Autistic people look for patterns in general, look for patterns, and they look for rules, and they use those to balance out their choices in the way they operate within the world. I followed rules that I did not like because the way my brain processed the needs. Following
Mhm.
those rules was not good for my children.
Right.
But they were the rules that others approved of,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
When I didn't follow the rules, I got the most parenting criticism. But when I wasn't following the rules, I was doing the best for my children.
I share that sentiment, and I always said that when I'm parenting my child, my number one goal is to do what allows her to be her authentic self. Anything I even do in the DEI, and I say DEI B space because I think belonging should be a part of it. I do it to honor that person's authentic self. So the choices that I make for my child may not appear in Parenting 101. I may not be a guest panel speaker on a parenting forum, but they were what was right for my child. It allowed her to be her authentic self, right? So even something so small, I think about growing up where my father let me wear my Halloween costume to school. It wasn't Halloween. We had clean clothes, so it wasn't like I didn't have anything else to wear, but it did not hurt anyone. And that's what I wanted to do. And he supported that. And that stuck with me when I became a parent is how do I honor this child's individuality? Right? How do I advocate for her to be her? Because again, as I said, me being me should not stop you from being you. So I did, and I still get criticism. Um, I hear feedback and I hear commentary, but my pillow test is the decisions I made. Can I go to sleep knowing I honored this child's authentic self? If the answer is yes, I sleep well with negative comments and feedback, right? If the answer is no, that's something that now I own that, right? Because I owe it to her as her advocate to make sure that she shows up in the world the way that she is. And she doesn't have to hide the fact that there may be things she's challenged with. Because if I celebrate all the great things that she does, we have to acknowledge some of those challenges too, as well. I also think about with challenges, getting comfortable in my parenting. I had to come to a realization that she's not broken, that there's nothing that I need to fix. I spent a very good part of her earlier years trying to fix her, right? And the fix is well, this is what the other children do, right? And I was going from such a superficial standpoint, because we fail to realize that even children who are not neurodiverse, do we think about the mental health issues that they have, right? Do we take for granted that because your child can be alone, that they're left hours upon hours alone with social media, with the television, right? What is that doing to their emotions? What's that doing to their mental? So those are some things that maybe people take for granted, is having that ability that your child can be alone or they can be independent. But do they lose their individuality? Do you support their individuality? Right? So that's what kind of, I think, that we can make followers and we can make leaders by the decisions that we make, right? So I think that if we support people's individualities, support them being their authentic selves, we give them that opportunity to lead, right? To make those decisions and know that they have support should those decisions not work the way that they think it will. I think that's a really important message that I would say to any parent recently getting a diagnosis of their child being on the spectrum or being neurodiverse or neurodivergent, is there's nothing for you to fix, but everything for you to support, and working from that place. And I think that can filter into our workplace at our workplace too as well. There's nothing for you to fix, but it's everything for you to support. How do we switch? How do we go down that lane? Is a very just important message to put out there.
Yeah, I think one of the things we struggle with as parents, especially when it comes to the education system, is that it's a system rooted in the development of a worker in a very specific way. And we may not think of our education system as that anymore, but its roots are still feeding the current system,
Right.
where we try to systematize, we try to standardize, we try to line up and straighten up everybody into the same kind of thing. And we're learning more and more and more that that's not working. For at least the last 3 decades. So the federal government does the writing report card and the math report card, reading and writing report card, math report card, every 4 years. And they look at an elementary marker, a middle school marker, and a high school marker every 4 years. The statistics for our graduating seniors, so those are the people who make it all the way through and walk the stage, right?
Right.
Our graduating seniors are still, for the last 30 years and still today, graduating 6 out of every 10, 60% functionally illiterate. And what that means is, it doesn't mean if you hand them the newspaper, they can't read an article or whatever. But learning from that article may be a little removed from them, right? They haven't taught how to put those words into their own context.
Right.
Approaching learning beyond their familiarity may be lost to them. And these are not learning deficiencies. These are things we haven't taught, right? And part of the reason we haven't taught it is because we take everybody and we say, you must learn reading this way. You must learn writing this way, right? What if you don't learn that way?
There's no thought to that. And that's where you now have individuals being put into different streams because they don't learn the way that everybody else does. Does not mean that they're not going to achieve the same learning outcomes. They're just not going to achieve it the way that it's presented, right? And I think that's probably something that the school systems or educators need to look at a little bit more, is how do we customize? What's our flexibility? What's our room for that accommodation?
Yeah, and I think those report cards are letting us know that our standard way of thinking, right? If you're obviously not doing well in that system, you're an aberration, right? Because look, most people are doing well, not according to the statistics. If 6 out of every 10 kids are graduating without reading and writing functionality, we're not, most kids aren't, right? Now, you can actually graduate with A's and be functionally illiterate.
Of course.
in many ways, that was me. I was a brilliant writer, right? But because of my dyslexia and they didn't understand what it was doing, they didn't understand what my output could be if I could get input more successfully, right? There were lots of things. I took an entire course where I got an A in the course and I didn't understand a thing I read.
Right.
I didn't understand one thing I read, and it took me hours to read because I didn't have the right skills for my dyslexia. But I'm a really good BSer, right?
Well, no,
I can listen in class
Yeah.
and kind of be like, I think I know what the teacher wants, and I'm really good at giving that, right? So nobody knew how challenged I was.
because we are not necessarily taught to think and learn, we're taught to regurgitate,
Exactly.
right? Isn't
Right.
that what testing is? Weeks before testing, you're given all this material, you study it so that you pass the test. But do you know what any of that means? So if you think about a multiple choice, and it's funny because there are people who you can give them the hardest multiple choice in the world and they will get 100. But if you leave one answer that's open-ended, they're stumped.
Mhm.
Because that's not what they're taught. They're not taught to think critically. They're not taught to be independent. That's where that kind of we cookie cutter, right? So we cookie cutter students and then we get into the workplace and we cookie cutter employees. That's why when you're in an interview and you say something that you feel went completely left, you see it in their face because they have a cookie cutter, right? That's something that we've just taught. That's what we do. That's just our cultural norm, right? To fit into society, you have to be this. Anything outside of this, well, we don't know what to do with you. So we're going to just stick you with all the other people we cannot categorize. And I think we do a very big disservice. Another, just for me, it just sparks something with advocating. There are things that my child excels at, right? That she doesn't need accommodation for, right? That I will say, no, we need to teach her at the grade level that this is presented at because she excels in that. You're not just going to give a general blanket, right? And say, well, nope, you are classified as this and these are the courses you take. We, again, respect her individuality, allow her to be great. Take off those limitations, redefine what a student learner is, what an independent learner is, what a scholar is. Those are some things that we need to do. And that's what we as parents and guardians have to advocate for our children.
I absolutely agree. And I'm hearing like so many of the different arguments that have been presented to me, right? Like you're asking too much of the teachers, you're asking too much of the system, you're asking too much all the time, right? And that may be one of the most profound ways I could label my life in its complications. People telling me over and over and over again who I am is
Right.
too much, right? Because yeah, I got A's. I graduated second in my class in high school and I went on, I did really well in college. But a lot of teachers didn't enjoy having me in class because, and I now understand it's my autism. I have like a desperate need for things to be accurate and truthful and make sense. And when they don't, I'm kind about it. My approach is a little softer than maybe others, but I still want to know.
Of course.
That didn't make sense. You said this here and now you're saying this here and I'm reading this over here. Please explain that to me. Not everybody's prepared for that, right?
No, I know that firsthand.
Yeah. And I think a number of autistic kids, whether their identity is neurodivergent is known or not known, they get labeled as troublemakers, obnoxious, all kinds of things because they want something from that educational experience that they're not getting. So you'll have the bad kids who start trouble because they're not getting inspired enough, interested enough.
Right.
Their personal needs for that educational experience far exceeds what they're getting. And as children, they're not making spectacular choices for how to do something with their energy, right?
Mhm.
But they're going to immediately be called the bad kid. They're going to be penalized, punished, shoved out, turned away, and nobody's going to look at, okay, why? Why were
Right.
they up wandering the classroom? Why did they flip backwards in their chair? Why did they smack the kid next?
Right.
Like, if we don't ask the why, and that's where we started in this conversation, right? We
Right.
started with the whys and the hows of relating
Mhm.
and accommodating and meeting each other where we are.
Right. But those feelings also are shared by me as an advocate parent, right? I am that troublemaker parent. I don't, you don't get to send home forms that clearly exclude my child and ask me to sign without me saying, please see the amendment on the back. If you can provide this language, I'll be willing to sign, right?
Mhm.
Does that feel obnoxious? Sure, but to me it doesn't. And it's always the way you go about doing it, but I can't sign something that excludes my child,
Right.
right? I can't participate or support something where my child is not going to get the best learning experience. So yes, I will be that parent in the front row. That's that long-time listener, first-time caller. Yes, I have a question. Does anybody else have a question? At this particular point, they're just like, we're going to close the meeting. LaToya, do you have any closing remarks? Because I can't do that anymore. Because I know in the beginning I was like, well, I don't want to ask for that because I don't want to seem like I want preferential treatment, or I was scared to ask for it, where it's now, hey, I have to ask. Because I feel a lot of times the one person who speaks up is sharing the thoughts of many.
Yes.
And we like to say, well, that's only one person out of 50. No, sometimes it's only one person out of 50 who feels comfortable enough speaking up, right? We got to open those lines of communication and be willing to listen, and listen with understanding, and know there's a difference between agreeing and understanding. That's how we start creating these spaces where people feel comfortable. That's how we increase psychological safety and inclusion in our schools, in our workplace, in our society as a whole.
Yeah. Oh, I could talk to you forever. I have so much fun talking to you.
Always, we have good conversations.
So we'll have to do this again. But we are coming up on an hour, and maybe let's stick with the parenting piece,
Mhm.
because you've had some experience and you do feel courageous enough to stand up for your child. Is there something you would like to say to parents who are really struggling with this? They're not being heard, they're not being taken seriously, or they're being treated poorly, right?
Mhm.
Because any of us, if we're trying to advocate for a child and people aren't getting it, we get more, right?
Right,
Whatever
right,
we started at, we are now more,
right.
right? And that can increase the resistance, increase the shunning and the shaming. Um, if there's something you have to say to those parents, I think they're going to be like sitting on the other end of the screen going, "Oh yeah, speak to me, LaToya."
There is definitely a lot of strength in numbers and to use your resources. So I can tell you when my child started kindergarten, and we sat down and we had a meeting about her development, her daycare teacher came, her support worker came. I had some documentation from her doctor. I just made sure I had a team of people with me, right? As support. And I think we don't do that. We don't reach out into our networks. There are other advocacy groups. If there's something that you don't feel comfortable saying, there are nonprofits, organizations, there is legislations and bills that will say that for you. So it's really getting out in the resources and connecting with other parents, connecting with other groups, and using them fully, right? No one ever says, well, you can only ask us a question once. Continuously doing that, educating yourself, knowing what your rights are as a parent, knowing what your child's rights are. It might be a lot to navigate, but like I said, if you have a resource group or you extend your network, there is support in numbers.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And where were you when I was raising my children?
Trying to raise one. No, I look at that and I said, this DEI space, it's not a job for me, because all I've ever known how to do is advocate for people who don't have voices. All I know how to do is look at equality and equity. So it just became a natural extension of what I normally do, and especially just being a very big advocate for myself, going through school and having parents that were advocates. This is my space, right? And I found my reason why. I always say, any job that I have or career I have has to be obituary worthy, right? Being the best salesperson on earth is not obituary worthy, but being able to say I've changed and impacted so many different lives, that's the headline that I want, right? I know it was a little morbid to think about that, but that was the metaphor I most use, right?
Well, for a lot of us neurodivergent people, morbidity is our favorite place to live. So
Live. Well, there, it's fitting. It's fitting. It's understandable.
Oh, LaToya, thank you. You have shared from your heart and shared really beautifully and usefully, and I'm so grateful. Let's do this again, not only for the INNIS conference, but beyond. I have a feeling that something really potent and powerful is going to help you extend your reach, because the work you're doing is really, really good and very, very needed.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. So we will talk again. Thank you.